Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Goodness. It feels like the world is going through a grinding mill at the moment. Assassination of the Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in the Iranian capital Tehran has rocked the Middle East. The incident has left a question unanswered. What's the future of Gaza's hostage ceasefire negotiation given Haniyeh headed up the group's political operation from overseas and acted as a key person with international mediators? Hamas responded to this incident as this: "This assassination will not achieve the goals of the occupation and will not push Hamas to surrender." The Iranian supreme leader has responded to this as saying Israel will suffer a harsh punishment for the killing. So will the death of the Hamas leader would develop Israel's conflict with Hamas and its allies in a multi-front, a fully fledged war in the Middle East? There is another new information is coming out of Lebanon. The US, the UK, Australia, France, Canada, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, Japan, Turkey, and Jordan are among the countries who have urged their citizens to leave Lebanon as soon as possible. So why is this sudden announcement? Hours prior to Hamas leader's assassination, a senior commando of a powerful Lebanese militia and a political movement, Hezbollah, senior commander Fouad Shukur, the most high-profile member, was assassinated by Israel in Beirut. He was a close advisor to Hassan Nasrallah, the influential and the long-term Hezbollah leader. So Nasrallah have given a television speech post that incident, and this is what he has to say: "The conflict with Israel has entered a new phase. The enemy must wait for the inevitable response because it has crossed red lines." He added, saying that the reaction would be proportionate to Israel's targeting of a civilian building. His tones seem to indicate that the group remain uninterested in another major war with Israel, but there are concerns they could be sliding into one. Post this incident, Iran vowed a severe retaliation against Israel. Now the fear that Hezbollah, an Iranian-backed militia and the political movement based in Lebanon, could play a key role in such retaliation. So US Embassy in Beirut have said this: "Those who choose to stay in Lebanon should prepare contingency plans and be prepared to shelter in place for an extended period of time." As always, Pentagon has said this. It is deploying additional warships and fighter jets to the region to help defend Israel from possible attacks by Iran and its proxies. Here is what UK has to say. It is sending extra military personnel, consular staff, and border force officials to help with any evacuations. 2 British military ships are already in the region, and the Royal Air Force has put transport helicopters on standby. UK Foreign Secretary has said this: "The regional situation could deteriorate rapidly," and Iran's state TV has warned the world would witness extraordinary scenes. Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned Israelis that challenging days lie ahead. "We have heard threats from all sides. We are prepared for any scenario." While in Iraq, several US personnel have been injured after a suspected rocket attack on the American military airbase used by US since 2004 following the invasion of Iraq. So what does the international community has to say? The international community must work together to prevent any actions that could make the conflict much bigger and wider very quickly. Rosemary DiCarlo, UN Under-Secretary General for Political Affairs, said, "This is my question. Wouldn't UN be keen to talk to the major players in the same international community by not aggravating the situation by supplying arms, warships, and more importantly, to fund the war?" Devil is always in the details. Let's get into it. So the recent war began in October 2023 when Hamas carried out an unprecedented attack on Israel, killing about 1,200 people and taking about 250 others back to Gaza as hostages. So, according to the territory's Hamas-run health ministry, the attack triggered a massive Israeli military response, which has killed at least 39,000 Palestinians in Gaza. As you can see, there are more players in the war than just two. So, will the assassination of the so-called terrorist leaders solve the underlying problem? How long has the conflict been going on between Israel and Palestine? When we just look at Gaza and Israel conflict, the Gaza-Israel conflict is a localized part of the Israel-Palestine conflict, which began in 1948. So it's not a war from yesterday, it's about 76 years long. Yes, 76 years long. Clearly, what we have not worked out is no war can or will solve conflicts between people, communities, and countries. So, where did all of this start? Britain took control of the area known as Palestine, following the defeat of the Ottoman Empire, which ruled the part of the Middle East in the World War I. The land was inhabited by Jewish minority and Arab minority, as well as the other smaller ethnic groups. So to Jews, Palestine was an ancestral home, but Palestinian Arabs also claimed the land and opposed to move. Now, one would hope the international community will have a solution for all, right? Tension between the two groups grew when the international community gave the UK the task of establishing a national home in Palestine for the Jewish people. This stemmed from the Balfour Declaration in 1917, a pledge made by then Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to Britain's Jewish community. This was later endorsed by the newly created League of Nations, forerunner of the United Nations, in 1922. Now, where will the minority Arabs go? Between 1920 and 1940, the number of Jewish arriving there grew. Why? Many were fleeing from persecution in Europe, especially the Nazi Holocaust in World War II. In this period, violence between Jewish and Arabs and against the British rule also increased. In 1947, the UN voted for Palestine to be split into separate Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem becoming an international city. That plan was accepted by Jewish leaders but rejected by the Arab side and never implemented. So, rise of Israel. In 1948, unable to solve the problem, Britain withdrew, and Jewish leaders declared the creation of the State of Israel. Fighting between Jewish and Arab militants intensified for months. And the day after Israel declared statehood, 5 Arab countries attacked it. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fled and forced out of their homes, and which they remember and call it as the catastrophe. By that time, the fighting ended in a ceasefire the following year. Israel controlled most of the territory. Jordan occupied the land, and which became the West Bank, and the Egypt occupied Gaza. Jerusalem was divided between Israeli forces in the west and Jordanian forces in the east. Because there was never a peace agreement, there were more wars and fighting in the following decades. In the war in 1967, Israel occupied East Jerusalem and the West Bank, as well as most of the Syrian Heights, Gaza, and Egyptian Sinai Peninsula. So most Palestinian refugees and their descendants live in Gaza and the West Bank, as well as the neighboring Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. Neither they or their descendants have been allowed by Israel to return to their homes. Israel says this would overwhelm the country and threatens its existence as a Jewish state. Israel still occupies the West Bank and claims the whole of Jerusalem as its capital, while the Palestinians claim the East Jerusalem as the capital of the hoped-for future Palestinian state. The US is one of the only handful of countries to recognize the city as Israel's capital. In the past 50 years, Israel has built settlement in the West Bank and in the East Jerusalem, where more than 700,000 Jews now live. Settlements are held to be illegal under international law. That is the position of the United Nations Secretary Council and the UK government. Among others, Israel rejects this. It makes one wonder if the powers of the international community, is it in their hands or is it in the hands of a few? Now, let's continue through the Gaza Strip now, the narrow strip of land sandwiched between Israel and the Mediterranean Sea, but the short southern border with Egypt. Just 41 kilometers long and 10 kilometers wide, it has more than 2 million inhabitants. It is one of the most densely populated places on earth. In the wake of 1948-49 war, Gaza was occupied by Egypt for 19 years. Israel occupied Gaza in 1967 war and stayed until 2005. During that time, Jewish settlements were made. Israel withdrew its troops and settlers in 2005, though it retained the control over its airspace, shared border, and shoreline. The UN still considers the territory to be occupied by Israel. So, we can't move forward at this point in the Israel-Gaza war without looking at the rise of Fatah, the political and the military organization of Arab Palestine, founded in the late 1950s by Yasser Arafat and Khalil al-Wazir, with the aim of wresting Palestine from Israel control by waging a low-intensity guerrilla warfare. Fatah had Syrian support and placed themselves in Syria initially. Many fights, many disputes after that, amid the disappointment caused by Fatah's defeat and division, and against the backdrop of the popular uprising known as the First Intifada, the rival Hamas movement was funded to challenge the Palestine Liberation Organization in 1987. Competition with the newly founded Organization for a Popular Support, in 1988, Fatah-led Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, declared independence as a government in exile, recognized the existence of the State of Israel, rejected terrorism, and embraced two-state solution. It pursued negotiation with Israel, and in 1993, Israel and the PLO signed a peace agreement. The following year, the Palestine Authority was established to govern the emerging Palestinian autonomous regions, and Gaza City became Fatah headquarters. Elections were held in PA-administered areas in 1996. Arafat won the presidency, and Fatah captured a majority of seats within the Palestinian Legislative Council. Hamas did not participate in the elections. Arafat remained president of the PA until his death in 2004. Post his death, Mohammed Abbas succeeded as the next president in 2005. By then, Fatah's popularity was somehow diminished, and it suffered from a reputation of inefficiency and corruption, which led to the increasing popularity of Hamas. Hamas, formally established in 1987 by Sheikh Ahmed Yassin after the outbreak of a Palestine uprising known as the First Intifada. The following years, Hamas declared that liberating Palestine from Israel occupation was every Muslim's religious duty. Hamas carried out its first attack against Israel in 1989, abducting and killing 2 soldiers, leading to Israel's arrest of Yassin. Later, he was released in exchange for Mossad agents who had tried to assassinate Hamas's political bureau chief, Khalid Mishal, in Jordan. Hamas entered politics in 2005 and won a landslide victory in parliamentary election the following year, beating its rival Fatah. But the two parties could not work together, Hamas favoring armed resistance, Fatah preferring to negotiate. A year later, disagreements between them led to an armed conflict that led Hamas to become in charge of Gaza, while Fatah held the West Bank. Today, both the European Union and the United States classify Hamas as a terrorist organization, while others see it as a resistance movement. Hamas's most important ally in the region is Iran, but it has also received significant financial and political support from Turkey. Qatar hosts Hamas's political office and also provides it with financial resources with the knowledge and the cooperation of the Israeli government. Hamas is in meanwhile one of the components of Iran's so-called Axis of Resistance, a regional network of anti-Israel partners that include Palestine Islamic Jihad, Lebanon's Hezbollah, Yemen's Houthis, and various military movements in Iraq and Syria. Hamas's rival party, Fatah, which dominates the Palestinian Authority in the rules in West Bank, has formally renounced violence, though it has not always upheld the vow in times of high Israel-Palestine tensions. The split in Palestinian leadership and Hamas's unwavering hostility towards Israel diminish prospect for stability in Gaza ahead of the ongoing war, which has only cast the territory into further despair. So, torn between war and peace, militants in Gaza has fought several wars with Israel, which along with Egypt has maintained a partial blockade on the Strip to isolate Hamas and to try to stop attacks, particularly the discriminate firing of rockets towards Israeli cities. Palestinians in Gaza say Israel's restriction and its airstrikes on heavily populated areas amount to collect punishment. This year has been the deadliest on record in Palestinians' history in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem, the United Nations says. Palestinians also complain about the restriction of the military actions being carried out. Palestinians also complain of the restrictions and military actions being carried out there in response to deadly attacks on Israelis. These tensions could have been one of the reasons for Hamas's latest attack. but the militants may have been seeking to boost their popularity among ordinary Palestinians, including by using hostages to pressure Israel to free some of the estimated 4,500 Palestinians held in its prisons. So, what are the main problems between Israelis and Palestinians? There are a number of issues which the two sides cannot agree on. What should happen to the Palestinian refugees? Whether Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank should stay or be removed? Whether the two sides should share Jerusalem? And perhaps the most tricky one of all, whether the Palestinian state should be created alongside Israel. What efforts have been put towards in resolving these problems? Israel-Palestinian peace talks were held on and off between 1990s and 2010, scattered with outbreaks of violence. A series of secret talks in Norway became the Oslo peace process, forever symbolized by the ceremony on the White House lawn in 1993, overseen by the President Bill Clinton. In a historic moment, the Palestinians recognized the states of Israel, and Israel recognized its historical enemy, the Palestine Liberation Organization, as a sole representative of the Palestinian people. A self-governing Palestinian authority was set up. Crackdowns soon appeared, though, with then opposition leader, now the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, calling Oslo a mortal threat to Israel. The Israelis accelerated their project to settle Jewish in the occupied Palestinian territories. Palestinian militant group Hamas sent suicide bombers to kill people in Israel to wreck the chances of the deal. The atmosphere in Israel turned ugly, culminating an then Israeli Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin's assassination by a Jewish extremist in 1995. In the 2000, attempts were made to revive the peace process, including in 2003 when a roadmap was devised by world powers with an ultimate goal of two-state solution, but this was never implemented. Peace efforts were finally stalled in 2014 when talks failed between Israelis and Palestinians. So, who supports who in Israel-Hamas war? The US, the European Union, and the Western countries have all condemned the Hamas attack on Israel. The US, Israel's closest ally, has over the years given the Jewish state more than $260 billion in military and economic aid, and supplied air defense missiles, guided bombs, and ammunition. It also sent 2 aircraft carriers strike groups to the eastern Mediterranean to deter Israel's enemies, particularly Lebanon's Hezbollah movement, from opening a second front in the war. After supplying and supporting the killing mission, the US has criticized Israel over the scale of the Palestinian death toll, and sharp differences have emerged between the two allies over the war. I am pretty sure US is not naive to think that all the equipment that they had supplied for the war is going to be kept in a museum for display, right? And why is US involved in most of the conflict around the world? Well, that's for another day. Russia and China has both refused to condemn Hamas and say they are maintaining contact with both sides in the conflict. Russian President Vladimir Putin has blamed US policy for the absence of peace in the Middle East. Is President Vladimir Putin aware absence of peace is also non-existent between Russia and Ukraine? Iran is a key supporter of Hamas as well as Hezbollah. The Houthi militants have been exchanging fire with Israel forces almost daily since Hamas's attack. It's high time that we ask these questions very clearly. Will the assassination of the so-called terrorist leaders solve the underlying problem? Now, the Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who was the opposition leader back then, called Oslo a mortal threat to Israel and didn't support the peace process. At this point in the war history, Hamas sent suicide bombers to kill people in Israel to wreck the chances for the deal. Almost the same armed war strategy over 76 years. Is it going to bring a different results? Does the international community have a say in anything at all, or are they merely a puppet of the powers? Who else are benefiting from keeping this war alive? Are the arms suppliers and or the major Western powers? When we analyze the answers to this, you can merely see this is not just a war between religions, but it's much more bigger than that. With that, I will leave you today. Until then, you look after yourself. I'm looking forward to meeting you in another episode of Goodness. Thank you.